playing big, why we're playing small, and how we can walk this journey to playing bigger. And I want to begin by sharing with you why I even started to use this term, playing big. And to be honest, I'm a little shocked that I wrote a book called Playing Big, because people who know me think of, they often will say, Tara's work is so gentle and her writing is so gentle. And people who know my approach to personal growth tend to think of it as very soft and zen. It's kind of the last thing anyone thought I would write a book about, including me, is playing big. Something that can sound like we're going to get puffed up, we're going to push ourselves to be bigger in the world. Maybe this is going to be stressful, maybe we're going to be exhausted because now we have to play big. It's not what I expected I would call a book that I wrote. However, several years ago, I hung out my shingle and I started a coaching practice working with women. And how many entrepreneurs do we have in the room? Okay, some. So if you're an entrepreneur, you know, as you're starting your business, you have to decide who your customer is, what you're going to be offering. And some people can decide that right up front and just map it out on their yellow pad or on the whiteboard in their office. Some people have to figure it out organically. I was in that second category. So when I started coaching, I knew I wanted to help women. I knew I wanted to be working in this area of personal growth and psychology that I had been engaged with and loved all my life. But I didn't know more specifically than that what I wanted to be working with women around, what I was really going to be offering to people, who my customer really was going to be. So I was waiting to see who's showing up in my coaching practice, what are the challenges that they're coming to coaching for, and what do I most like helping people with. And so women started coming. And one of the first clients I had was a young woman who was sort of a middle manager in a large organization, not particularly recognized or visible within her organization, not seen as a star, but seen as sort of a solid, good worker type. And as I got to know her in our coaching sessions, I learned she was passionate about the field she was working in. She was an avid reader, reading all the journals and latest thinking in her field. She was making interesting connections between all of the cutting edge ideas. She had a whole philosophy about where her organization needed to be going. She had some dreams about how she wanted to be sharing that. All of this was sitting inside of her. And I would look at her in our coaching sessions and again, just think this woman is so incredible. Her vision for the organization is powerful and right on. She's completely dedicated and ethical. She's got so many talents to share. And all of that wasn't coming out of her. And she also didn't know those things about herself. Then I had the next client come in. Again, really capable, hardworking, ethical woman, very talented. Particularly this client that I'm thinking of was really excellent at mediating conflict and solving problems. And she'd always be brought in when there was tough situation to navigate or an intractable conflict in the organization. She didn't really love the position that she was in, the job she had, and she had her eye on this other role that she wanted to play and that she knew the organization needed, but that job was going to need to be created for her. And so we started talking about how could she propose it to the leadership and what would that look like. And I watched her not at all be able to wrap her mind around the idea that that position could be created for her. Not at all, again, seeing her capability and her brilliance. So this happened again and again and again, that I would sit in my chair as a coach and see the tremendous brilliance in the women in front of me and watch their inability to recognize that brilliance in themselves and their inability, therefore, to bring it out into the world. And that really pained me. Not only because I cared about them, but because I could see what their organizations and what our world was missing, because it was missing their voices. So around the same time, I had started blogging, and I was writing about a whole variety of personal growth topics that interested me. And after a couple years of blogging, I got really curious to know, well, who was reading my work and what did they want to hear me writing about? So I sent out a survey to my blog readers, almost all women. And in the survey, I asked them, what's the biggest challenge in your life? That was sort of my market research question. I was thinking, I want to write more about whatever they're feeling challenged by. So we could hear from some of you, what do you think some of the biggest challenges in these contemporary women's lives might be?
Balancing.
Yeah, balancing work and family. What else?
Trusting themselves and their capabilities.
Trusting themselves, yeah.
Time management.
Time.
Courage to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had this long list of multiple choice options. Work, family balance, stress, not enough time, financial challenges, health challenges, unsupportive people in my life, I'm not sure what I want, this whole list. But then, because of what I had been seeing in my coaching practice, kind of on a whim, I just added this other thing at the bottom of the list. And I didn't know, how could I encapsulate this theme that I was seeing in a multiple choice answer. So I just put, I'm playing small. That was how I articulated that challenge. And when I got the data back, I'm playing small was what the largest number of women had said was the biggest challenge in their lives. More than work-family balance, more than time, more than the things that we typically see on women's magazine covers and hear about in the talk shows, and that the media frames generally as the biggest challenges facing women, and playing small. So that really struck me. It's like, okay, not only is there a world of women playing small right now, but there's a world of women walking around feeling like they're playing small, having this awareness. I see this woman who's wandering by is nodding. Yeah, we're drawing you in.
I just can't sit.
Okay. And they don't like that they're playing small. They feel challenged by that. They want to change it. And yet, obviously, somehow, if they're continually feeling challenged by it, they don't know how to stop playing small. That was so striking to me. So I started to really dive into that as the focus of my work. How and why are we playing small? And most importantly, what helps us play bigger? And my coaching practice was such an amazing laboratory, because really it was like, that's where things get real. Because if people come to you paying a lot of money for each session to get over that challenge, you got to do more than share some good ideas or give advice that you're fond of. You have to really produce change in their lives. And so I started to experiment with what did consistently produce change around that for women, what produced change for a diversity of women, what was most powerful. And then when I started to see, okay, here's a set of things that's really helping women to start play bigger, I thought, well, how can I offer that to more women? And so I turned it into a course. And after about 1,000 women had been through that course, a 6-month course, and they were getting great results in their lives, one of them's here, I turned it into a book. And that's the book that we're talking about tonight. I think it's really important also to make the distinction between talking about women playing small and blaming women. Maybe some of you are having that thought, because I'm talking, what are we blaming women now for the dearth of women in leadership? That often happens in our media, in our cultural conversation. It happened to me a couple of years ago. I was going on a morning news show, talking about some of the little things women do in our speech and our communication that really undermine us. Like when we say, I'm no expert in this, but, or when we apologize all the time, that kind of thing. And it was a live show. 4 or 5 news anchors were going to be talking to me about this. So I was kind of nervous, going on live TV, and it was early in the morning, and I hadn't slept that well because I was nervous about the live TV. And about 10 minutes before I was going to go on, the producer walked over to me and said, okay, here's the script that the anchor's going to use to introduce you. And she showed me this piece of paper, and it said, women are more than 50% of the workforce. There are 43% of middle managers, but there are only 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs. Our next guest says women have no one to blame but themselves. Welcome, Tara Sophia Mohr. So there I am, in my little TV dress and high heels, nervous already, going, oh no, now I have to, in this moment, figure out how to solve this problem, stand up for myself. And so I said to her, okay, well, I know this is a news show, and so I'm sure you want to be accurate, and I would never say that. And she said, well, I think it's too late for us to change it. Oh gosh, I'm going to have to really solve this problem in this moment. And so I said to her, well, how about we say that our next guest says there's something women can do to change those numbers. She's like, I don't know. Let me go ask the executive producer. And then she came back and she said, okay, we can change it. So I tell that story because it really, I think, encapsulates the way we typically get confused in our culture and conflate anytime we're talking about women's inner barriers to empowerment. We conflate that or confuse that with blaming women. And I want to invite all of us to think about it differently tonight. The way that I think about it is that we, in this moment, as women, we're really living in a remarkable moment, coming out of a very long legacy of women's complete exclusion from professional life and public life and intellectual life and political life. And that history has left a lot of external impacts and residue and reverberations through our culture, right? Policy, cultural norms, types of institutions, all of that. But it also has left an internal legacy in us. And so when we talk about women's playing small, when we talk about how we struggle to see ourselves as the ones for leadership, or we struggle to recognize our capabilities, I think we're just looking at, for real, in a realistic way, the internal legacy of the history that we're coming out of. And that far from blaming women, we're actually wisely taking responsibility for changing that legacy in ourselves so that we can move forward individually and we can move forward as a culture. Are you with me on that?
Yeah.
Good. So with all of that context, I want to share with you some of the big ideas that are so transformative in helping us begin to play bigger. I kind of want to take a little vote in the room so we can go where this group is most interested in. So I'm going to throw out a few topics and just raise your hand if that's one you'd love to hear more about tonight. So self-doubt and the inner critic. This thing called your inner mentor, how you access your inner mentor, and the whole topic of women and mentoring. It's kind of being your own mentor and the topic of women and mentoring, okay? Unhooking from praise and criticism. What? Okay. Oh, that's a great one. That's great. Okay. Unhooking from praise and criticism. The problems we have in our careers if we were really good at school. Okay. Alternatives to self-discipline. What's wrong with Okay. And communicating powerfully. Okay. All right, that gives me a little bit of a sense. So we'll talk about the inner critic and the inner mentor a bit. I think I'm going to see if I can actually get out from behind this podium. May I take this up? Okay.
Yeah. Here, I'll help you with that. There we go. It's a little wrapped up here. But we can...
Okay.
Okay.
And how does it see me? I'm down here. Okay. I like that.
There you go.
Okay, great.
Is that good?
Okay, yeah. So the inner critic and the inner mentor. So one of the ways to think about playing big is to think about managing the different voices within yourself in a new way. So it's not so much we're changing who we are, but more like we've got parts of us that help us play big and parts of us that keep us playing small. And a whole lot depends on which part is leading and which part of ourselves we're taking seriously. So when the inner critic is leading, we end up playing really small. And my criteria for the inner critic is if you're ever hearing a voice in your head that's talking to you about yourself in a way you wouldn't want to talk to someone you love, you're hearing the inner critic. And for women, a lot of times the inner critic manifests in not so obvious ways. So the obvious inner critic lines would be like, you're horrible at that, there's no way you're qualified, oh my God, did you see your upper arms as you walked by that window? The less obvious ways are, you're probably too young to do that, you should get more experience first. Or it's probably too late, you're probably too old, that was a decision you need to make 15 years ago if you were going to do it. You're not ready yet, you're not totally qualified, it would be better if you did a little more training or apprenticing first. You could totally do that, you just need to get a PhD in the topic first. So those more subtle ways that our inner critic manifests. And one of the themes that for me has just burned stronger and stronger in me the more I do this work is that we're not trying to get over having an inner critic. That we're actually not trying to become more confident. And I think this is really misunderstood in the women's career conversation and can mislead many women because there is this emphasis on confidence and the idea that confidence is going to help us be more powerful in the world. And my take now is like, well, we got the problem right. There is a problem around women's self-doubt, but we haven't gotten the solution right because the solution isn't confidence. The solution is having a different relationship to your self-doubt. Your self-doubt is not going away. One of the things that's been so striking to me doing this work is that women at the top of their fields, in every field, are still grappling with a vicious inner critic. And in the book, I share some of the stories from ones you might know, like Twyla Tharp or Danny Shapiro. And Twyla Tharp, one of the most renowned choreographers of our time, saying, every time I start a new dance, I hear the voice in my head, he is 100% sure this is going to be the one where it will be revealed I have no talent. People are going to laugh me out of the audience on opening night. Danny Shapiro saying, every time I start a new novel, little voice in my head says, you have bit off way more than you can chew, now you're in way over your head. So what those women talk about is that, they go, oh, that's the voice, I know the voice shows up every time, and if I listened to it, I would never choreograph another dance, write another novel. So what's distinguishing them is not that they're not grappling with that crazy voice of self-doubt, but that they've learned how to not listen to it. And that's the name of the game. And that's so different than waiting on confidence, right? So I would invite you to all begin to think about, what does your inner critic say? What is it saying to you around your playing big? And to start to use the tools, and there are many of them in the book, for how we can relate differently to that voice of self-doubt. The most fundamental one is simply saying, oh, I'm hearing my inner critic right now. Because when we label it and become an observer of it and remember that there's such a thing as the inner critic, now we have some space and some choice. Do I want to take direction from it? Do I need to believe that voice? Can I act in spite of that voice? With me? Yeah. Then there's this other voice in us that I call the inner mentor. And my concept of the inner mentor is based on work that I did when I was being trained as a coach, which I was trained here in Mohr at the Coaches Training Institute, which some of you may be familiar with. And when I was being trained there, a big part of the curriculum was this concept that they called future self, where as coaches, we were trained to take our clients through a guided visualization and meditation process to meet a vision of themselves 20 or 30 years in the future. What was so fascinating about that process is that when I watched my fellow coaching students do it the very first time we did it in our class, our teachers took us through this 20-minute visualization to meet ourselves 20 or 30 years in the future. And then afterwards, the students were sharing what they saw. Almost everyone in the room was weeping, including the business guys who hadn't shown much emotion for the rest of the training. And it was really clear listening to people, they didn't just meet an older version of themselves. They met something like an expression of their most authentic self, or their wisest self, or their more soulful self. And I found that really fascinating. And I started to use this tool with my women clients, taking them through that visualization. And I found that always they would meet this woman who was incredibly moving to them, wise, loving, surprising in many ways. Was not their ego fantasy of who they hoped they'd be in 20 years, but something much more interesting and complex than that. And that older, wiser self would have a very different and helpful view of their current challenges than they had. And this became a real cornerstone of how I was working with women. And I started to call it the inner mentor, because the way that we started working with that figure was, what if she was your mentor? What if you were consulting with her on your biggest career dilemmas? And this was particularly powerful because, as you all know, and your hands went up because of this, when I mentioned this topic, right, there's so much emphasis on women finding great mentors. That's a really big kind of catch-all solution for all the problems that we see happening for women in the work world. Oh, we just need more women mentoring women. That's going to solve it. We need more women to be mentors. We should start a mentoring program. The women need to make more time for that, all of that. But what I hear from women again and again is they can't find the mentors they're looking for. Either the senior women don't have time, the senior women are threatened, the senior women didn't take paths that they can relate to or that they want. And many women have had really painful experiences of betrayal and conflict in their mentoring relationships as well. So it's not, of course, that we want to throw that out. There's a place for mentoring relationships, but their value is perhaps more limited than what we've hoped. And there's a really essential, necessary complement in this inner mentor who's going to have the right answers for that individual woman. And happy to talk more in the Q&A about how that works out for people. So that's the inner mentor. So one way we can think about this process to playing bigger is you're starting to tune into your inner mentor and be pulled into her to grow into that woman and to listen a lot less to your inner critic. Another really key piece for women is what I call unhooking from praise and criticism. And this just started to come up so much in my coaching practice that a lot of the career issues women were dealing with looked really different on the surface, but if you looked one layer deeper, they were all in some ways issues about praise and criticism. So that could look like a woman who was always really a high achiever and a good student and got the gold stars in school. But then, as she got to a more senior level in her career, she had to make controversial decisions. And she was going to have to do things that were going to get gold stars from some people and criticism from others. And all that good girl conditioning and history as the gold star earning performer was making it really hard for her to do what she needed to do at that level in her career. Or it could be a woman who showed up for one client as a woman who had about 25 years experience in her field, which was domestic violence prevention and support services. And during that period, she had really seen what didn't work about the status quo model, and she had a vision for what she thought would work better. And she wanted to launch her own organization that would follow this new model. And yet she knew she was going to get a lot of criticism and pushback from the field's establishment when she did that. And she found that her fears about that criticism and disapproval were underneath all her other excuses really why she wasn't moving forward with it. On the other side of the coin, for some women, they were playing small because they were uncomfortable with praise. So if they grew up in a home where if they were shining too brightly, they were told they were being arrogant or too big for their britches. Mm-hmm. If they grew up in a culture where you don't want to be the tall poppy, you want to fit in with everyone else, that became this discomfort with praise as I don't want to do anything that's going to earn me too much of the spotlight was why they were playing small. So the idea of unhooking from praise and criticism is not about becoming impervious to praise and criticism because, hey, we're human, and when someone praises us, it's going to feel good, and probably when they criticize us, it's going to sting a little bit. But it's looking at where do we get hooked, where do we get really trapped by praise and criticism, and how can we become less impacted by what other people think. And the big concept around that, one of the big concepts and tools for that unhooking that I'll invite you to start applying tonight is this, that feedback can only tell you about the person giving the feedback. It can never tell you anything about you. So when I first wrote that in the manuscript, you can imagine how my publishing editor, who has made a long career out of giving people feedback, how she related to that. She crossed it out, diplomatically. She crossed it right out, and then she wrote in the margin, Tara, don't you mean like feedback doesn't only tell you about yourself, it also might have something to do with the person giving the feedback? And I had to write back and say, no, I really mean feedback can never tell you anything about you. It can only tell you about the person giving the feedback. And I really believe that. So let's walk through what that means. It means, let's say, we have some writers in the room, or writers, aspiring writers, yeah. So if you show your work, you're writing to, let's say, a writer's group, and everyone in the group says, you know, I found this really hard to follow and I couldn't stay interested in it. So if you interpret that as telling you about you, that would mean it's a boring piece of writing, I'm a boring writer, I'm not compelling, my story is not interesting, I'm not a good writer, right? All those kinds of stories. If you interpret it as telling you about them, it sounds more like this didn't resonate for that audience, or this didn't make sense for that audience, or this type of readership couldn't follow what I was saying. That doesn't mean that you dismiss the feedback or ignore it. So it's not a flippant, oh, it's not about me, it's about them. It's like, oh, that tells me about them. Are those the people I'm trying to reach and influence and engage? If they are, if that writers group is representative of your readership, then you want to really pay attention to the feedback. But you're paying attention to it not because it tells you about you as a writer, but because it's information about the people you want to reach. So we better incorporate that. But maybe you decide, well, maybe then that's not my readership, and this is my readership. So now I'm going to go see if my work resonates with those people. And if it doesn't, then you want to listen to why and learn more about why. So it's not a dismissal of feedback. I'm a huge fan of listening to and taking feedback seriously, and I do it all the time in my work. But what's enabled me to do that is always seeing the feedback as information about the person giving it. And that includes positive feedback too. So if I write a blog post and it gets a ton of attention, if I were to say, oh, that was a good blog post and I wrote that one really well, that would kind of become a distraction for me. And it would also prevent me from as easily writing my next blog post because I'd be worried about whether it was going to live up to it. But if instead I take that positive feedback as, oh, that tells me like these people are interested in this topic, so now I know something about them. And if I want to reach them and engage them, maybe I want to write more about that topic. Okay, now it's just emotionally neutral information. And this goes for feedback from colleagues and bosses and customers and people in your personal relationships and investors and donors if you're in the social sector, all across the board. So I invite you to think back on an experience of really painful negative feedback. And just right now consider, okay, what if I interpreted that as telling me about the person giving it? What might it tell me? And then to think back on really positive feedback. Well, if I interpreted that as not about me, but as about the person giving the feedback, how would I interpret that? So that is a little bit on unhooking from praise and criticism. I want to leave lots of time for questions. So I will, I'm going to close with one more idea, which the book also closes with, which is this idea about being on the transition team. And probably some of you in the room have at some point been assigned to a transition team for some sort of change in your organization, right, or your community. So I really think of all of us women as on a huge global transition team. And what we're transitioning between is a world that has been led and designed and defined by men to a world that we hope will be led and defined and designed by women and men. And I think because we're human, we can lose the big picture perspective that we all in our lives have been born into that transitional moment. And when we can remember that, we can start to see a lot of the challenges that we're facing in our own empowerment as women, but also the tough realities in our world in a really different way. And start to think about, okay, what's the part on that transition team that I can play in my family, in my community, in my workplace? And how could it free up more energy in me to see everything that I'm experiencing as part of that transition? I'd love to hear from you, hear your questions, your dilemmas, your thoughts, and have a good conversation. Thank you. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Laura.
Laura is a graduate of the Playing Big program.
Having done your program, I'm curious if you've had additional insights and learnings after publishing your book and putting it out there and getting feedback or being out in the world, hearing input. Is there something that's evolved in your thinking that you found powerful, or some key learnings that you're taking away after the book has been put out in the world?
Well, I think definitely that piece I was alluding to earlier about how wrong we go when we're looking for confidence, that's just come up a lot, and particularly because there's been more attention on women's self-doubt just in the past year to 2 years as the book's been coming out to the world. There have been a lot of media and other books around the topic of women and confidence. And so that piece of, we're actually not looking for confidence, we're looking for a new relationship to our self-doubt. And my own process of launching the book, understanding that when I was at my own playing big edge with that, with like writing the op-ed for the New York Times that was based on the book, that my inner critic was going to be coming up as I was on my own playing big stretches, and there was no leapfrogging over that. And what I really had to do in those moments was not try and find confidence. That wasn't going to happen. It was more like, how do you write the piece anyway, even as you're hearing the voice say, there's no way, there's no way, there's no way they're going to publish this, right? So that was big for me. The other thing that's been really interesting, and I hope I'll get to dive more into in future writing, is the issue of competition between women, jealousy between women, women sabotaging or undermining each other. That just comes up a lot in the Q&A. And there's a lot, I think, for us to talk about there. There was recently that study that just came out this fall showing how dramatic women's preferences are to have male bosses over female bosses, which just speaks to that. And I think we are completely missing we're missing any kind of sophisticated psychological conversation around that, and also historical conversation around that. It's just like, well, I had really mean women bosses, and men have always been the ones supporting me, and nobody's looking at the social context of why that might be. So I'd like to write more about that.
I will definitely give that book to several of my clients.
Yeah. Let's go here and yeah.
You mentioned something about discipline.
Yes.
And there being an alternative.
Yes, there is. Yeah, so this is the last chapter in the book is called Let It Be Easy, and it's all about how do we sustain taking the kinds of action we want to take without having to try and find self-discipline to take them. And I actually don't believe that there is such a thing called self-discipline. I have never seen it in myself. I have never seen it in anyone else. I think what looks like self-discipline from the outside can be a whole range of things. So you can have 10 women who are running a marathon, and what's really motivating one is that she loves running, and what's really motivating another one is that she has this awesome circle of women that she runs with every day, and what's really motivating another one is that she has a deep, deep hatred of her body and is petrified of what will happen one day if she doesn't run. So self-discipline is this interesting term that we just invented. I also did some research into the history of the word, and it's like, well, we just invented this idea that we could discipline ourselves, and there's no research basis in terms of how our brains work for that idea. And it kind of plays cover for a whole range of motivations, and then we all blame ourselves for not having enough self-discipline. So there are a lot of alternatives, but the overall idea is to think about what are the support structures that I can put in place that will make it truly doable, if not easy, for me to take the actions I want to take, rather than rely on self-discipline. And some of those are social supports like accountability partners and champions and doing things in a social context. Others have to do with how we plan and how we break things down, how we let go of enough other commitments in our lives to truly make room for things. It's sort of like a really loving, sane approach, realistic approach, instead of the imagined discipline that we hope for.
Good. One quick one.
Let me come back to one
Okay.
thing so people can get a chance. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question, I don't know if you covered it in your book, it's about salary negotiating.
Yeah.
Or negotiating compensation.
Yeah.
And how one values that, and then there's also the reality of just speaking up about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have thoughts about it.
Yeah, and we do a lot of work on negotiation in the Playing Big course, and yeah, so there's some research that suggests that women don't negotiate as frequently as men. There's also a lot of contradictory research, so I share that because for a long time the idea was floating out that it was like absolutely black and white clear that women don't ask and men do, and that seems to be true within certain populations and studies, but not broadly. And that part of the phenomenon that's going on also is that women are responded to very differently when they do ask. That being said, if you're noticing that it's inner critic, it's good girl norms, it's the fear of being seen as pushy or unlikable that's preventing you from asking or speaking up, that's part of why all these tools are here, so we can manage those voices and ask anyway. Often women have to ask in a different way than men do, so we have to be much more conscious of continually conveying warmth and sort of displaying feminine norms in our affect in order to not have a backlash against our asking. Going to what we were just talking about earlier, that tends to be more true if we're asking from another woman than if we're asking from a man. And then the other piece that's really interesting with negotiation is there's a study that I just adore and find so fascinating that looks at women and men's negotiation performance, how that performance is affected by their understanding of what makes a successful negotiator. So in this study, some men and women were told that, so the participants didn't know the study had anything to do with gender. Some women and men were told what makes a great negotiator is that they have great listening skills, that they can read other people's emotions, and that they're good communicators. The other group was told what makes a great negotiator is being strategic and competitive and good with numbers. So the women in the first group, women outperformed men in the negotiation. In the second group, men outperformed women. Exact same negotiation. So reframing, you're noticing, do you hold the internal stereotype that men are good negotiators or that you're not a very good negotiator? That will really affect how you show up and how you do in a negotiation. If you can reframe your definition of negotiation so that it's aligned with what you see yourself as good at, which for many women is more the EQ side of things, the emotional and soft skills, that will allow you to really show your strengths and perform at your full potential in that negotiation. Yeah, good. Yeah.
So I just want to thank you.
Oh,
I saw you almost a year ago when you did the luncheon.
at Speak to Me?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And was reading
It's
all
great.
of your weekly, and you were very kind.
Yeah.
Reading all your weekly blogs that you
Oh,
I
thanks.
get, and I bought the book. And I have crafted an article that I'm going to get published,
Fabulous.
largely because of this.
Oh, that's
And
great.
so I find this book so poignant,
Thank you.
and I probably recommended it to hundreds of people. at this point.
Thank you.
So I work with about 3,000 women.
That's fabulous. What is your article about?
It's about why my job that I have currently is the perfect job for me.
Fabulous. Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's really great to hear. That reminds me also, I wanted to pass these around. So the blogs that, what was your name?
Christine.
Christine, the blog that Christine is referring to, if you want to sign up to get it, it's all free, and I write articles regularly. You can sign up here and then you'll be on the list. Yeah, other questions and comments?
I'm already on.
You're ready on it? Okay, great. Hi.
Hi, my comment to you is I have absolutely embraced, and she's heard me say, I need a PhD in that.
Yeah, that's a common one. There's a section in the book about women who say that, yes.
And it was a revelation to me to hear it say it so simply and with a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it's the truth for me and my own experience in witnessing in other women that we tend to do what you say.
Yeah.
Is feeling the need to be the expert before we can go forward. And I've been playing small because I don't have a PhD in that. And so I appreciated it so much because it's really motivated me to let go of that concept. Not that I want to ever stop learning. That's one of my favorite things to do. So I just wanted to comment that that's such a key phrase, and I catch myself doing that to myself, and then I just say it, and it helps me not hear the inner critic so much.
Thank you. That's
appreciate
great.
it.
Yeah, seeking more education is a common hiding strategy for women. Hiding from sharing their voices and doing the work they feel called to do now. It's, of course, not the case that getting education is always a bad thing, but let's be very specific about when the good times are and what the good reasons are and when it is a hiding strategy. And also to have a lot of compassion for ourselves, because why do we do that? Well, we do that because as women we were told, well, my mom and my grandmother couldn't have that job, couldn't do that work, but if you go to school and get good grades and get the right training and do good work, you can participate. And so the deep message for us is to go internalize information from the outside so that we're allowed to participate. And it's a very different mode to start trusting what you already know. Very different mode, and very scary and more vulnerable. When you add to that the layer that, well, what exactly were we internalizing? We're internalizing a canon of knowledge that doesn't have any women's voices in it, right? In almost every field. So deep, deep conditioning that what it means to be qualified for something is to be an expert in it. And what it means to be an expert in it is that you've internalized what men said about it for the past few hundred years. That is very different than, I have an idea and it might be enough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and do this succinct. But so I've been a coach for over 10 years, and I right now have a 2- and a 3-year-old. Both have special needs. So that was a big curveball.
Yeah.
And I've always had this, like, need to write a book. I've always been into writing. And so one of the things I'm curious about is, and eventually I'd love to do something with not just, my business is called Empowering Women. So I coach a lot of women too. Actually, I don't coach a lot of women. I coach about 5 women at this point because I have a 2- and a 3-year-old, so there's my attention. And in some ways, I feel like I do play big because I'm a rock star for my kids because I go for it for them. But there's a part of me that's like, when do I get to play like my game? You know, like when do I get to write my book? When do I get to be on stage doing the things I love to do? When do I? And that might be now talking about the special needs of my children, because that's kind of a big game for me. But I'm just curious, like, how you address. So I'm kind of in the camp of professional and also stay-at-home mom. And there's a piece here on timing. So and I kind of, when you talk about discipline, I kind of go to this place of, I put discipline over here and kind of look at it like it's choices you make. And my choices right now are obviously to do the things for my kids, but there's this piece of like timing of, how long does this stay on hold, or how long is it like, I just don't know how to get time in my day to sit down and regenerate my blogs and whatnot, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I feel so cautious about this question because I think that each woman knows on the inside when it's choices and when it's siding with your fears instead of your dreams. You know, meaning there is a way in which you could absolutely be making a totally centered, clean choice about focus right now and dealing with some of the hard moments that are like, yeah, this is not the most fun phase of my life for the part of me that wants to be on stage, and this is not the most fun phase of my life that wants to be able to say something at a cocktail party of what I'm doing that's impressive, right? Like, and it actually takes a lot of courage to weather that. And there are also times when the fear that we all have of playing big, of sitting down to write, of giving the talk, of whatever, that we all have that fear because playing big is scary and vulnerable. And for all of us, the fear goes looking for cover. And the cover can be I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't have the degree, I can't do it because of financial constraints, it wouldn't be fair to my family, I'm focusing on my kids right now. Sometimes that can be a container for playing small. And so it can be either, you know, and you probably somewhere in there know what it is for you right now, I would say. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tara, I saw you at the 16 event in the fall,
Oh, great.
and I've been telling all my friends about the book, and I brought you
Oh,
on here
that's great. Hi.
because I'm really enjoying it, and I am going through it, you know. So I wanted to have you speak a little bit about something that really struck me, and this fear that there's actually in, I think it's the Torah and the Hebrew, there's like two different definitions of fear in the Bible. Can you talk a little? It was really profound for me because I think there's fear that like you just described that keeps us contained and small, and then there's fear that actually tells us we're on the verge of playing big.
Yes.
So could you speak a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a chapter in the book about fear and about these two types of fear and about how we can respond to each type of fear. And I often say this is my favorite teaching about fear. The chapter is called A New, Very Old Way of Looking at Fear because it's a novel way that not too many of us have heard about, but it is based on these two words for fear that are used in the Old Testament, ancient Hebrew words. So one of the words that's used for fear is pachad. And the definition of pachad is it's the fear of projected things or imagined things. So the fear of the things we imagine could happen. So for example, when I was coming here today and I decided I didn't leave enough time and they had changed the Presidio so that you couldn't get on the Golden Gate Bridge where you used to, and I was gonna have to make a huge U-turn and I was gonna be late for this event, that would be the fear of projected or imagined things, right? This is our overreactive, worst case scenario fear. Most of us have that come up all the time. There's this other word for fear, and that word is yirah. And yirah is used in 3 different contexts in the Old Testament. It's used to describe the feeling that someone feels when they're inhabiting a larger space than they're used to inhabiting. And you can take that as a literal space or a metaphoric space. 2, it's the feeling we feel when we suddenly come into possession of more energy than we are used to having. And 3, it's often the word that's used to describe how one of the Old Testament figures feels when they're in the presence of the divine. In possession of more energy than they're used to, inhabiting a larger space than they're accustomed to, and in the presence of the divine. So when I read that, I thought, oh yeah, like I have that moment with my clients all the time. When they say their real dream, when they articulate what's really true for them, when they start working on a real dream, and then they say, oh my God, I'm so afraid, but there's this kind of sacred, alive vitality to that fear. That's yirah. And so I really started to put this into practice with people, to talk about the two kinds of fear and how we need to respond to each kind very differently. Because if we're feeling pachad, if we're feeling that panicky, overreactive, irrational fear of things we imagine, it's always a future-oriented fear, we want to be really careful not to be led by that fear, right? Not to have that be our decision maker. Otherwise, we'd never do the thing out of the fear of that horrible outcome. And that will often come up when we're contemplating playing bigger in some way, because playing bigger involves emotional risk of failure and criticism and rejection and vulnerability and change and too much success and all these things that we can have our projected or imagined fears about. But on the other hand, if we're feeling yirah, we actually want to welcome that feeling and savor it, because that's telling us, wow, you're really, whatever you're doing here, you're touching the sacred within yourself. And you're stepping into a larger space, and you're plugging into your conduit to more energy and passion. And that can feel like an uncomfortable kind of fear, but it's actually something we want to learn to breathe into and live with and even seek out the things that bring us back. Yeah.
First of all, I just want to thank you. I watched one of your videos, and you had like the 7 ways you can figure out.
Yes.
And I just wondered if you could just speak a little. That was very powerful for me, because I always feel, well, I know that I've been playing small. I've been very aware of it for a while, because in my family it was, you also spoke to this, just like, you don't want to shine too bright, you don't want to stand, you just want to be right here and you'll be accepted. And my life is exactly like that. And right now I'm on the precipice of where I'm at a jumping off point, which is just an opportunity. So it's
A yirah point.
yeah. So that was very helpful to just kind of look at those 7 things. So
Yeah.
can you speak
Yeah.
a little more about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, we haven't even got to touch on that chapter yet, so I'm glad you brought it up, which is about callings and how we identify our calling or our callings. So my definition of a calling is it's the assignment we get to bring light or love into the world in a particular way. And I think we all get many of those assignments. So I do not like the question, what is my calling? I like the question, what callings am I receiving right now? They come and go, they begin and end, we get many. You're not looking for your one right calling that you're going to ride off into the sunset with forever. And some of the ways you can identify a calling, so usually it can initially manifest in one of 2 ways. On the positive side, it can be sort of a nagging idea or vision you have of something you want to bring into the world that will meet a need that's in front of you in the world or enrich the world in some way. Sometimes on the negative, it can show up as a more negative feeling of there's a particular issue or problem in the world that pains you in an extremely persistent and vivid and strong way. Typically, we feel more like we received our callings or we've been assigned them than we chose them. We also get a kind of magical feeling of flow and rightness when we're doing the work on our callings. That's not to be confused with feeling magical and right when we're contemplating doing them, because we usually really resist our callings, often for decades. Literally, yeah. That resistance will often show up as there's no way that could be the calling for me. I'm not the kind of person that calling's for, or I'm not who I would need to be to do that. That's for a brave person, that's for a savvy person, that's for whatever, a younger person, right? And we also tend to feel I don't have everything I need to do that. I would need more resources and connections and this and that. So it's really important to know that those are very normal feelings to have about a calling, because otherwise people tend to think, well, I'm thinking I'm not who I need to be, that's for someone else, and I'm thinking I don't have what I need, So that can't be my calling. Aren't you supposed to feel like all wonderful romantic about your calling? No, pretty typically we feel it's too big for me, I don't have what I need. And our work is actually to try and find a way to start even as we feel that. Knowing that the process of moving into the calling is how we discover and find what we need and how we grow into the person we need to be. That's my theory of callings. Yeah?
Can I make a quick comment to
Yeah.
that? I shared with the group that the name of the article I wrote, and just the opposite was true for me in the job that I'm in now, or the business that I run. It wasn't a big enough job. So I had resisted it.
Yes, well, and
Because I
that's,
felt like I should be doing something bigger.
yes, I'm glad you pointed that out because that's, that is also, yes, especially this feeling that it can be, it's not big enough, it's too frivolous, it's not prestigious
Exactly.
enough. And I find that also a lot of women have callings often that have to do with beauty or design. And is that you? Okay. Yeah, and that can be a big one where because aesthetics have been sort of categorized as something feminine and therefore a frivolous nice to have in our culture, we then, those of us who feel callings in that area end up feeling like, well, I should be doing something more serious and legitimate. And I think there's so many reasons it's so important for those of us whose callings have to do with beauty and design to really bring that into the world. Yeah, hi.
Thank you for writing an inspiring book.
Thanks.
Gotten to the root of many, many issues that said them both simply and with a great energy. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for coming. Let's see, I think we're probably close to our time. We'll do one more and then we'll sign some books.
Okay, I just opened, I've read the first part, thank you very much, it's already been helpful.
Good.
And I opened it up when I was sitting here and it says, okay, don't think about the giant website and the fear that's gonna entail, you know, to put yourself out in this glowing light. Get a free website and do it in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Where's your free website and how do you do it in 20 minutes?
You can do
What's your-
WordPress.com is a great one.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. That was easy last session. All right, I will be here signing books.